Hello everyone, it's been another fun week. So I've just finished up reviewing Gears of War Judgment, which is right on the heels of God of War Ascension. God, it would have been great to have had like maybe an extra week or two in between those two, because I'm always like cautious about whether or not the subtitle I'm giving it is the appropriate one. But it makes me think about prequels. I was not a huge fan of either game, primarily due to their gameplay and their content, and they're both prequels. And I started to wonder if there's something inherently flawed in the concept of prequel. And then I started to think about, okay, within literature, are there any prequels? And I've gone over in my head, there's only one thing I can think of, and it's The Merry Wives of Windsor. It's a Shakespeare play with Falstaff in it that was written after Henry I, 1 and 2. Totally very, very, very different. And as the story goes, Queen Elizabeth was so fond of the Falstaff characters from Henry IV that she kind of commissioned Shakespeare to have to bring back the character because, well, he died at the end of Henry IV. You know, I know you not, old man. That's what all you kids are saying to me all the time. Okay, that's where we go with prequels. And get this, no one really loves Merry Wives of Windsor. Now, the other very famous prequel, Star Wars. We all know our rather contentious feelings towards what happened with the beginning of it. So what is it that makes a prequel so challenging? Well, I think, A, you kind of remove some of the dramatic tension because if the ultimate thing is, does he live or die? Does he make it? Well, you've kind of resolved that if you're starting ahead of where the narrative once was. In games, it gets a little bit more interesting because games are made over time. And even though maybe the best game isn't the last one in the series, it tends to be the most technically proficient. It tends to have the most understanding of where the gameplay can go. And it tends to have elements that are introduced at the end. So that when you're doing a prequel at the beginning, you're adding in all those elements, and it does seem to break up that sense of canon. Another thing that I do not believe really existed until late in the 20th century. Thanks, Tolkien. Now, the thing is, in the case of these two games, they're prequels because the overarching narrative has been resolved, which, A, I think should indicate that the companies behind these games, or the publishers behind these games, should have seen that coming. And when they wanted the fourth one, understand that this is going to be somewhat disruptive. But there are such opportunities in the gameplay, and that's where I was so surprised with both. With Kratos, there could have been something different that was done with the combat, something to give it a twist, something to make it feel distinct and unique, and it really was, at the end of the day, just another God of War game. In Gears of War, there could have been something far more exciting that happened with the game. And they were clearly focusing on the co-op elements of it. They could have given it a pop, that you really are facing this kind of hopeless crusade against the locust hordes that are coming out of the ground. And at the end of the day, it really did feel like a series of combat exercises. Then they say if you're good or if you're bad. So are prequels inherently bad? In concept, I don't think so, but in practice, well, there seems to be a trend that's being demonstrated both in games and other types of media out there. Is it crass and commercial? Probably a touch, but it doesn't mean it has to be bad. I don't know. Maybe Prometheus 2 will knock my socks off. All right, question time. I had to go through all the comment section of my last something to try to find a question, but I did, and it's actually a good one. This is from Nightmare452. Do you see the FPS shooter genre continue to dominate, for lack of a better term, the gaming sales charts as it usually does? Do you ever see a racing, strategy, or JRPG reach the level of sales we are now seeing for the Call of Duty and Halos of the world? All right, shooters. A lot of people are complaining, my God, it's just another shooter. Look what Call of Duty has done. It definitely has had an influence. But I'm not seeing a ton of shooters out there that are in the traditional Call of Duty. Large multiplayer, very directed, and relatively short single-player campaign. There seems to be less and less of that. Crysis 3 is about the only thing I can think of recently. The trend I'm seeing in game design and what's getting popular, well, Ubisoft seems to be doing quite a bit of it, both with Far Cry and Assassin's Creed 3. It's somewhat of an open world with a clear directed story and a ton of ancillary activities to do. It's this idea, I think, of trying to sell this robust package that's worth your $60 or $60 and more. I bet we're going to see more and more of this as we get into the next generation, just because with all the new technology that's under the hood of the PS4, and we expect something very similar coming from Microsoft, having those open worlds, having that level of variety should become easier to program for. I can't say that I'm the biggest fan because having all that content sometimes doesn't work in the favor of the story, but at the same time, it does give the player a real sense of invention as they go through the world, learn the controls, and take advantage of everything. So if they're gonna do a lot of cookie cutters in this form of game, I think you might be a little better off. All right, one other thing. This is a big week for us here at Retro Games. We have 2 new shows. One of them, Spoiled Games, I mentioned it before. People sit around a table talking about a game that's already come out, hopefully with the idea that you have also played it as well, so we can all become part of the discussion. The first one is DMC Devil May Cry. We're gonna have Brad Shoemaker from Giant Bomb, who's going to be joining us, as well as Anthony Carboni. I've seen it, it's really good, and I encourage you to check it out. Also, Address the SESS. We did this once, it's a Google Hangout, we're now gonna brand it. It's Address the SESS. It happens on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Get into that Hangout, you get to ask me a lot of questions, and trust me, I know there's a few of you that really have something to say to me.